Welcome to Work Life by Design. I'm your host, Mel Marsden. If the last few years have taught us anything, it's that change is inevitable and we no longer need to go to work to work. As a workplace dynamic strategist and the founder of Community, I draw back the curtains on my own business, the clients and projects that we deliver, along with tapping into the knowledge and insights from academics, business leaders and champions of change. I believe that our environments have the power to positively influence our behaviour and performance, inspiring our human potential. This program was made possible with the support from the Alistair Swain Foundation. To find out more, go to alistair-swain-foundation.org. With more of us embracing the opportunity to work from home, it's really leaving our workplaces underutilised as our occupancy levels in the workplace continue to drop. And the impacts of this are varying from workplace to workplace, really depending on the design style and the approach of those spaces, ranging from limited variety in the spaces available for employees to perform their work, through to a lack of energy and buzz that comes from bringing people together in the space. So if you've got a traditional, more open plan office where you've only got workstations, meeting rooms and offices, there's not that variety of space for people to be able to go and work in different environments. And if you're positioned in a sea of workstations and the three people around you have all decided to work from home that day, there's really lacking a lot of that energy and buzz that comes from people being co-located in the space together. And so as someone who engages with organisations daily in this very delicate dance of who gets to own their desk and who doesn't, I see the commercial realities of the leasing costs versus the underutilised floor area and that lack of opportunity to provide variety and choice to employees in where and how they work within the workplace. So today's conversation is something that I am very keen to explore. And when today's guest, Dr. Jenna, shared an article written by BBC on LinkedIn, questioning if the hybrid office will ever feel like home, with her view of the impact of this approach, I was keen to engage her in a friendly debate on the pros and cons of the to own a desk or not to own a desk opportunity. So in this article, Jenna shared her thoughts that says, while this sounds ideal in theory, this choose your own adventure approach to daily working could backfire, as it introduces the risk of proving exhausting and therefore off-putting to workers often already overwhelmed with work obligations. Not everyone embraces change, let alone adventure, especially on a daily basis. And while I agree with some of Jenna's sentiments, it's also see the converse of this and how we can create opportunity to support organisations and employees to have more variety in the way that they work and supporting those commercial realities of their work environments. So as an advocate for creating workplaces that respond to the unique and individual needs of our organisations, their teams and their people, my view is that by relinquishing our individual ownership of our work points, we can in turn optimise those work environments to cater to a greater variety of work styles and activities, further enhancing our entire experience of work. So let me tell you a little bit more about Jenna. She's the founder and managing partner of the UDA Group, which advises clients on organisational and spatial, both physical and digital, transformational change relating to built environments curated for health and well-being. Her clients have included commercial office owners, operators and tenants, as well as military, government, healthcare, higher education, aged care, and more on a global scale, with particular emphasis on the US, Canada, the UK and Australia. As an advocate for bridging industry practice with academic theory and research, Jenna is also a visiting fellow with QUT's Centre for Decent Work in Industry. She's an honorary fellow with the Centre for Conscious Design, a former health equity and current research advisor for the International Wellbuilding Institute, and a contributor to Harvard University's Human Flourishing Program's Flourishing at Work interest group. Jenna leverages her education across engineering, architecture and design with her depth and breadth of work experience relating to strategy, change management and design thinking to encourage multidisciplinary cross-pollination in theory and practice and to guide the creation and curation of intelligent, sustainable and flourishing environments for all. So as you can see, Jenna is very well versed in supporting organisations to create an environment that supports us all to flourish at work. Having worked in organisational change and most recently completing her PhD focused on flourishing health and well-being, I was super excited when she agreed to engage in this conversation so that we could start to explore it from a few different angles and see where we land. So this is a really interesting conversation exploring the role of workplace design on the individuals that occupy them, something that I'm hugely passionate passionate about, and great opportunity to talk to someone else who is also hugely passionate about this. So without any further ado, let's jump into today's episode and let me introduce you to Dr. Jenna. So Jenna, thank you so much for joining me on the Work Life by Design podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I'm pretty excited about today's conversation because today's conversation has been sparked by a conversation that we started on LinkedIn after a post that you put up around individuals and ownership of their own particular desks and how we can promote belonging at work. So I'm really keen to get in and discuss that. But before we get started, I'd be really interested to know a little bit about your background, your history, and how you came to be in the world of flourishing design for work.
Well, it is a bit of a circuitous path. So my original degree was in mechanical engineering. And when I first came out of school, I was doing organizational change work and service design for the government with very large consulting firms.
How did you go from mechanical design into that?
I think it was just the propensity to take charge of the oversight side of things when we were doing design projects. Not many people take to that side of the business. And Accenture was on campus recruiting, and I had a job before I graduated. And it was just a really interesting place to find myself. It was a nice reprieve from studying. And I really enjoyed the collaborative element of the consulting world, that constant changing pace, the challenge that came with it, working with different clients. And while there were a variety of federal clients, at least those clients were quite different. So within a few years, I had experienced quite a few different challenges. I really enjoyed that. And that ended up taking me to the ATO of all places in Canberra for when I came to Australia. And I was more interested in the building I was in than the work that I was there to do. And ironically, it was a recruitment and retention plan. And I probably could have just pointed to the building saying, this is its own recruitment and retention plan. Had I known then what I now know. But it did lead me to want to continue to do strategy consulting, but do it for the built environment, something I was passionate about. And so I ended up taking a sabbatical, taking some time. I kept coming across environmental psychology, wherever it was Financial Times I would pick up while traveling, or it was a magazine I would come across, Psychology Today. And it just seemed like it was speaking to me. And so I decided to do a Master's of Sustainable Environmental Design at an architectural school in London, did that, and then got into smart buildings consulting for the next 10 years in smaller boutique firms, and then kind of fell into health and well-being work when the well building standard was becoming up and coming in DC right around 2014, 15. So I was there for one of the inaugural pitches just to test the waters. And I started having really smart clients ask me about it around 2017. And I was thinking, oh, this technology as a panacea approach to consulting is really not what I want to go. And I want to instead pursue something that's more health and well-being focused. And that's basically what led to this. I thought it was a better way to design. It was a better experience for occupants. We'd be emphasizing the people within buildings, people and technology, something that hadn't been happening in the past. And I could still use that change management and consulting side of my brain along with the other sides of the technical left side and then the creativity of the right side and bring it all together in what I did.
What an exciting career that you've had, and that just ability to kind of follow your interests and your passions and meander from, one side of things to the other and really kind of dive in, and to be there at those inaugural pitches for the well design, the well building. That's pretty cool. What a great career.
It was that was an exciting opportunity to be able to be there for that and just see it evolve over time and, become more active in the community the past few years.
Yeah, incredible. And so that's brought you through to your business now, which is the UDA Group. Can you tell me a little bit more around that, what it means and what this has inspired you to create as a business?
Sure. Well, around that time when I wanted to make that transition to health and well-being focused design, I was, on a job in London, and I came across the term eudaimonia. And having had no philosophies training whatsoever in the past, I wasn't familiar with the term. And the way that it was portrayed at the time was Aristotle's take on eudaimonia, which is being your best self. And so I quite like that explanation. And because so much of what I was doing at the time was design futuring, and working with clients to understand where they wanted to go in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and visualize what that landscape would be, and then the infrastructure that would be needed to get them there, both technically and physically, as well as organizationally. I thought one good way of doing that was designing for their best selves and having that eudaimonia in mind. And so when I was thinking through names for a consulting firm, when I created my own consultancy, I thought, Euda Group, that seems to make sense. We don't have to spell out eudaimonia, but it gets to the heart of the matter and the focus area that I really wanted to emphasize.
I love that you've embraced that whole philosophy as the core of your business, because I'm a big fan of it as well. And, you know, as we were just chatting about, it's one of the concepts that I utilize in my book and I talk about is the eudaimonia machine that David Duane has created and the principle of that. And I apply that same philosophy to some of the projects that I do in terms of moving employees through different levels of cognitive thinking by creating different environments and spaces to support their different abilities and the different requirements of the tasks that they need to perform within the workplace. And the intention behind that is that it is supporting them to flourish as they transition through those spaces and enabling them to do their best work at work. So the fact that you've kind of embraced that whole philosophy, but looking at it far more holistically, I think is really interesting.
Exactly. And yeah, David Duane's take on it, I really quite appreciate. It is a bit different than how I explored eudaimonia in my PhD, but it certainly has an interesting place, especially how it was featured in deep work for, as an approach to be able to focus. So there are similarities and there are differences for his eudaimonia machine and then the term that I've coined, which is eudaimonic design.
So tell me a little bit more about that and what you've learned from your PhD and your exploration of that. What did you find?
So with that, it really became almost a result of COVID for so many ways and how I ended up creating the PhD work. So 1 year into my PhD happened to be right around the time I'd be doing the confirmation, and it was the week that we went home for COVID. And I was doing the presentation. I think I was the first remote one done on Zoom that week. Or not that week, but in general. And so I was the very first one. And luckily I had been familiar with Zoom, having used it for years, but we had to recraft the entire design study. And so it became about older adults because that was really an area that needed help when you think about aging in place and how that impacts all people. That would be a means of inclusive design by designing for somebody on the edges and designing with them. Then you can design for other demographics. But then I also really wanted to explore it creatively and co-creatively with creative methods. And so it's really challenging to do that remotely. And so I had to create cultural pro packets and send out packages of activities to my participants and enable them to do different design drawing exercises at home and take photographs with the camera I provided to them. Those sorts of things to get them thinking and get them in that creative mindset before doing workshops. So that was really how I had to recraft everything. And then as we looked at it, I tried to embrace a positive psychology approach. And at the time it was going through a transition as well-being science. That's kind of the new terminology that comes with that. And so I designed quite a bit for self-determination theory. And if you're not familiar with those tenets, there are 3 tenets that make up self-determination theory, and that's autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And so with all the work, what we did was design for those 3 elements and then kind of in tandem design for the idea of eudaimonia and have that very pie in the sky, blue sky future of if you were designing for your best self. We're not going to describe what that is. How would you define that? What would that look like? And what environment do you want to be in to enable that to take shape? So that was really what I explored and tried to build some foundational theory around that would then feed my business.
And that was within their own homes during COVID there. So while they were sort of had the ability to completely control their own personal environment.
Exactly. So they were able to at least participate. They weren't making changes within their environment, or at least I wasn't asking them to. It was really just participating remotely. And I had quite a few participants across Australia, many in Victoria, that consistently were being kept to lockdown restrictions. So it was good that I didn't even try to ask people to come to Brisbane. We just made it completely 100% remote early on, and that benefited me hugely. I didn't have to redo things multiple times. It was just that one transition, and it worked out quite well.
And what did you find from some of those conversations? What were some of the things that impacted them the most around creating that space for them and the idea of what their best self could create for an environment?
Yeah, so it came down to a few different things. There were some principles that resulted, and I have 9 different principles that I've published a little bit on, but I haven't really shared fully. But mostly they were around things like choice and being able to do things and socialize as people wanted to, and being able to have a reliable environment that they felt comfortable in. Even things like understanding mechanically how they could address things in their homes and having instruction manuals that would articulate how to address something that would be a problem without having to call a specialist in. Just simple things. But one thing that really struck me was the propensity and desire for light. And I don't know if that's perhaps something that's a little bit more specific to the culture of Australia, because there's so much around brightness, light, sun in the culture. But that was by far the number one thing that when people were designing for eudaimonia, every single team said that that was in their top 3. They wanted to design for light and make sure that was somehow encapsulated in the design. So I thought that was really interesting. And there are other elements of familiarity, which goes to lots of the discussions about connection that's happening nowadays and belonging, having those references to familiarity and understanding just when you first see something, if it strikes you as being something that, oh, that reminds me of something 20 years ago. I think I now know how to turn that knob. Or if you're looking at something digitally, how I could press a button on a smart buildings interface and how that would just logically turn something on. So just having those touch points and mind triggers, I think those are some really interesting conversations. One thing that I think we talked a little bit about offline was the fact that I hadn't asked anybody to make any changes on their own to their lives or their personal circumstances or environments. And because self-determination theory is so inherent into encouraging intrinsic motivation, quite a few people started making changes of their own volition without being asked. So at one point, we hadn't interacted for about a month or so. And when we came back together, different people were saying, oh, I noticed when I was taking pictures of my house how this one corner seemed really blank. So, in our conversations about biophilia, I started talking to my kids about it, and they bought me a plant for that corner. And then another gentleman was saying, oh, I had this whole bedroom I wasn't even using. It was covered in tax documents. I finally cleared those things out, and I now use it and have people come over, and we play game nights or those sorts of things in there. So it was just really nice to see them take it to heart and actually act on it.
That's really interesting. And I love that you use self-determination theory, because that's an element that we've been utilizing in some of the work that we've been doing, as well as looking at how we can create that autonomy and mastery and that ability to have choice and relatedness in their workplaces, and the impact that then has on people's ability to then feel motivated and to be able to contribute back into their work. And I love the fact that light came up, because absolutely, again, I don't know if it's an Australian thing or not, but very much so, natural light has a big impact. And I know for myself, even when I looking for environments or when I'm trying to create environments for my clients, it's what's that natural light penetration into the building? How can we maximize that? How can we prevent, blocking that off by the way that we build and construct things within the space to ensure that we're getting as much of that through and sharing that love around within the environment as well. Now, what I'd really love to know though, Jenna, is how you've taken those findings, because that was obviously in an individual's home and their own private space. How has that influenced work in a more corporate environment where the organization is then trying to replicate some of those principles or bring that that idea of flourishing back into an environment that is not necessarily, something that an individual can control, but it's more controlled at an organizational level?
Yeah, I think with respect to the 9 principles, they were all on continuum. And so depending upon people's needs and their preferences for that day, that was something that they would then be able to decide. Did they want to be more social and outgoing that day? Or did they want to have a more private approach? And so just understanding not only what those principles were, but also just the means by which that they resulted. That was almost more impactful. And for so long, I had been doing these co-creative narratives and discussions with people that it really just encouraged me to do it slightly differently. So being very careful in the approach and applying ethics of care with the work that we were doing, making sure that all the appropriate people were brought to the table to have discussions. And in the past, when we would have workshops, you would have the C-suite members and you would have a few different people, and still would be a large group of people, but you'd look around and you wouldn't get the occupants, and you oftentimes wouldn't get facility managers or people who really knew how to run the buildings. And so now that it's informing the practice more, is that I'm really making sure that we have all the right people in the same room, and that everybody understands early on that our rules, which is something that we even did with the workshops for the PhD, that the rules are set up front and agreed upon by all, that it's going to be a respectful environment, that we're going to interact in this way, and we're going to listen to each other. And it sounds so simple, but I never really had to call it out before. And I am now incorporating that just because I think it's an interesting way to do things. And that was something that I had a reviewer and an advisor, and she had suggested making it fun and having it almost like a kindy rules. So it's like, be nice to your neighbor, don't antagonize them, share. And I think that that's been really interesting. And because of that, the eudaimonic design approach is not only about the principles that resulted for the physical space, but it's about how you designing carefully. And with that comes designing for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And if I'm doing that properly in my consulting, then that definitely shows in the work that comes out of it too. Everybody's a little bit more engaged and they feel that sense of ownership for the result.
Isn't it interesting to see how our approaches have shifted? And I think I approach my projects and my workshops and that co-creation space very, very similarly, because we're bringing a lot of different people to the table. And again, I think COVID has enabled that conversation to happen, because I think there used to be the remit of facilities and generally sitting underneath the finance team, that they were empowered to go and create the next workplace, and off they went. But they didn't take the input or the guidance of the people and culture team or the technology team. And these are the guys that have got to actually service the rest of the teams within them. People and culture are tasked with making sure that they've got an enjoyable, great place to work. I mean, you mentioned the workplace at the ATO before, and that if that was, if you wanted to talk about an employee retention strategy, just look at the building. These are the people that are tasked with trying to bring these people in. But then, you've got a completely disconnected group over here who are creating these environments, but having the right people at the table. And as you said, being respectful of each other's views. We understand there's budget constraints, but we also understand there's people requirements. We also understand that there's technology needs. It's how can we balance all of these pieces of this puzzle together to create an outcome that is going to service the requirements of the business. It's going to move us forward. It's going to support the people that need to work there. There's so many moving parts to this, and it sounds like, you've approached it very, very similarly. And I love the fact that you created those rules. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Priya Parker and the art of gathering, but this is a foundational element that she talks about. It's about creating these spaces and setting the rules up front and determining who those environments are for, like that container of space when we're coming in to have these meetings. Who is it for and who is it not for? And essentially creating that sense of belonging from the outset and the rules of play. And so it's really interesting to hear that, you're kind of already doing that in the way that you set it up. But she talks about it and how to structure that in a much more formal way.
Yeah, and it's lovely. Like you said, COVID was such an accelerator to be able to have these conversations more easily. And a lot of the work that I was doing with Uta Group before COVID happened were using these same premises, same engagement techniques, all of these different things, and focusing on environments. But with COVID now, I've been able to chuck that out the window. I don't have to do that part of the pitch anymore. I don't even have to write that chapter of a PhD to talk about why we're here. We know why we're here. Everybody feels that. So, that definitely has helped to have those conversations more readily and overcome some of the barriers and stigmas that in the past would have engineers going against architects, not being able to be in the same room. And that collaboration can definitely happen more easily.
What do our workplaces look like when we no longer need to go to work? As organisations navigate a new frontier, struggling to work out what's next in today's hybrid and distributed world, how can we leverage one of our greatest assets, our workplace? My book, The Next Workplace, Designing Dynamic Environments That Inspire Human Potential, will show you how to leverage your workplace to attract and retain talent, increase employee engagement, and elevate employee experience, plus deliver bottom-line returns on your investment. The Next Workplace is the ultimate playbook. It will inspire your thinking, show you how to unlock the data in your business, provide you with the resources to build your business case with confidence, and reveal the proven frameworks and practical tools to align, enable, and inspire the human potential within your organisation. So, to grab your copy and begin to reimagine your next workplace, head over to my website, melissamarsden.com.au/book. I completely agree with you. There's a whole conversation I don't need to have with clients now. It's like, yep, we understand what a workplace is going to do for us. Let's just do this and let's do it well. So it's completely elevated that. But that's also leads us really nicely into what kind of prompted this whole conversation to start with. And it's COVID and the fact that we don't need to go to work anymore. We can work from home. Hybrid work has been a completely accepted thing. We are working at home. We're working in the office. We're working in all sorts of different places. And this conversation, as I said earlier, got prompted by an article that you shared on LinkedIn and with your perspective on it. And the article was talking about the fact that many of us no longer own our own desk in the workplace. And that with that, we're actually losing our sense of identity because previously we had our workplace, we'd, hang our sweater over the back of the chair, we'd have our pot plants on there, we'd have our little knickknacks, we'd probably have some photos of our kids and our family sitting on our desk. And it was our home away from home. Now, with COVID and the pandemic and everything that's happened since and more people working from home, we are looking at changing the way that our work environments are set up because we're not utilizing them to their full capacity anymore. We're not going in every single day like we were Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So many organizations are looking at, okay, well, how can we optimize the use of our space? How can we increase our utilization? And with that, many times that means that we are no longer getting that own singular dedicated desk and we're having to share a desk. And your perspective on this is that that's actually starting to take away people's sense of identity and belonging within the workplace. So I'm just really interested to hear how you see this translating, given the research that you've done. What are some of the impacts of this? And, I want to have a nice, healthy, open debate here because I'm kind of sitting on the other side going, I see the commercial realities. I'm looking at the utilization. I can much better use this space. I think we can create a far better workplace if we look at this in a different way. What can we do here? Let's tease this out.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, as you said, it is an interesting topic and it definitely has its pros and cons. I kind of sit in between the two camps of academia and industry with this, though I think what I was responding to when I posted that, and I believe it was a BBC article.
Yeah, it was a BBC article. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes for everyone else to kind of check it out as well.
And it was a few months ago now because it's taken us a few months to get together. So I did skim it the other day. So apologies if I don't get things quite right. But what I thought was interesting about the piece was that they were talking so much about the importance of familiarity and the importance of having those aspects at your desk and being able to have that sense of ownership and therefore having more tendencies towards loyalty and therefore wanting to stay with your company and feeling more connected. And then almost this intense shift happened. And then they started talking about design and how rather than a desk, you can have a floor that's your home. Now you're going to have a locker and you're going to be able to, have it be open and choose where you go. We'll have a nice open walking stairwell so that you can feel open and connected. But it was almost like that completely goes against what was just said in the previous section. So it's like if you have a locker, you don't have those pictures of your family at your desk to make you be more honest. You don't have that sweater at your desk that you can then put on to be able to adjust to the thermal comfort, to your liking, and all these different things. And, you're potentially being pushed into interacting with people that you don't wish to interact with or who you've never met before. If you're able to choose your family, perhaps that's different. But just how it was portrayed in that article, it seemed a little bit extreme in the transition. And it was a little bit too much of my comment was it's choose your adventure. And when people don't really want change, let alone adventure, that can be really confronting to them and make them want to stay at home because they became comfortable in curating their spaces at home just as they want them.
Yeah, no, and I agree with a lot of those comments that you've just made there too. So let's unpick a couple of them because a lot of the work that I do is coming in and creating these workshops and co-creating these spaces. And there's an early on resistance around let's not share a desk because I don't want to have to come in here every day. I don't want to have to try and find somewhere to work. Where do I put my things? Like there's the usual sorts of raft of concerns. And rightly so, because this is a new concept for many people. They haven't experienced it before. Perhaps they've experienced it in another organization and it wasn't handled very well or the right spaces weren't provided. But my my alternative view of this, and we go back to the idea that we shared earlier about the eudaimonic machine and how we can utilize that from a workplace design perspective. So if we talk about that a little bit more, effectively what the eudaimonic machine is designing a series of spaces that help you transition from being in what starts off as being a very social, interactive, kind of loud and noisy space to gradually transition through a series of different work environments to better support the deeper and deeper cognitive work that you need to be performing through the tasks that you need to do throughout the course of the day. What I like about this is that we're giving people that variety, that sense of choice, the ability to manage their own environment. So as you said, if I don't want to interact with anyone, I can go and sit in the quiet space. And I know that there are expectations and rules around how we engage in that space. Like maybe there's no phones, there's no talking. I can go and do my work there without being interrupted. Or maybe I want to sit in the cafe and I want to be having a social conversation and chatting with my colleagues about these things. But I have that choice. I have the ability to choose where I'm going to sit to suit my own personal preferences, my own personal work style, my own activities that I need to perform for the day. Whereas when we own a desk, what we're doing away with quite often is, the ability to have that choice, because that's where I'm told is my desk. Yes, I can personalize it, but I have to sit next to this other guy and he talks really loud on the phone and there's nowhere for me to go and have that private conversation because we've given everybody a desk. So, we can't have quiet spaces and we can't have those collaboration spaces. We can't have those other fun spaces because our quota of floor area is taken up by everyone owning a desk. But the 3 people that sit around me aren't here today because they've chosen to work from home. This is, and as we said, this is the pros and cons of these things. Like if I'm going to go out and everybody has their own desk, but then we're all working from home, I can't give clients and I can't give the people who work in these spaces all this variety of space to then enable that personalization and choice around work style and work activity. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and so much of what you said it's definitely true. And that is the problem when you think about things like a desk per se. But if you're looking at it with respect to understanding people's preferences and work styles, I think that that's something that can be incorporated. And that's something I've been trying to do more of in the consulting work I've been doing is when people onboard, maybe talk to them about their work preferences. I think people are more in touch with what they like, what they respond to, when they need that, how they need that, those sorts of things. So having those conversations early on with management, HR, whoever it is that you normally talk to about your work, and letting that be known. And I think that there are ways that that can be incorporated into the day-to-day life. One thing that I really enjoy is the Belbin personality test, and it's almost like a Myers-Briggs for your work style, if you're familiar with that. And you can potentially marry people up so that they share a desk, but they share a desk with somebody they agreed to share a desk with. And it's almost like job crafting and job sharing. There are ways that you can curate that situation that it will enable your best self within reason. If you're not going to be there 5 days a week, then it makes sense that you shouldn't have that space fully allocated to you. But you go in knowing that. But by the same token, you may not even need that space. You may be able to feel quite comfortable in something along the lines of that physical eudaimonia machine that David Duane emphasizes and being able to do step by step for that level of concentration that you seek. But I think the other thing that I was commenting on with that article is that there wasn't a lot of discussion of neurodiversity and sensory sensitive individuals. And when you think about that in the space and that potentially making up about 20% of the population, then that's something too that gives me pause when you have an environment like that that's being pushed upon people. And depending upon the environment, if it's a startup, you're most likely to have even a larger percentage as that part of your population. And you need to make sure that they're part of the conversation and understanding the type of work that they're doing and their preferences for work. And it's not always as easy as a one size fits all approach. And, a lot of designers have the cookie cutter approach. They don't do the workshops as intensely as, we oftentimes do. So I think that was just the thing I wanted to pump the brakes on a bit, because it was a little bit along the lines of, well, if you do this and you encourage lockers and you do this, I would see people as just responding to that and doing that readily. But I immediately thought back to oh my God, I'm showing my age, but 20 years ago or so when I was in uni and doing first jobs, and I would be roaming around the library, unable to find a place. And our library at Johns Hopkins, where I went, was ironically very Eudaimonia machine in terms of verticality. So they had levels, and the top level was a little bit more socializing. And then the deeper you got down to D level. So serious study. And then the same sort of thing with consulting. We were all doing hoteling. That was huge in the 2000s. And I didn't have a desk for ages. And I remember just feeling homeless. Like I would have basically my desk in the backseat of my car or the trunk of my car. And I would go to client setups. We would share a LAN cable and we would have 10 of us around a table. And I think that was my visceral response also when posting this was, if people aren't getting the support that they need to just do the general needs of their job, then that can become problematic too.
Yeah, no, you did mention that in the article, and I was curious to know a little bit more about that. And this is what I'm coming up against, I think, with a lot of the organizations is they have these experiences where this hasn't been done well. And I'd be interested to know, I mean, looking back on that now and knowing what you know, was the design of the space just not well-rounded enough? Did it not consider enough spaces? Was it trying to service too many people without the capacity to be able to do that well? What were some of the insights that you think there from, the idea of hoteling particularly? Was it those sharing ratios were out of whack, that there wasn't the right spaces there to support the different types of work and activities? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think it was more the latter. There were plenty of spaces, but given the type of work that we needed to do and the intensity with which we were, focusing on these different activities, we needed to have individual thinking space. And there were tons of corrals of workspaces, but, you had maybe, I'm American, so I still use feet, but you had like 2 feet, or sometimes you're almost brushing shoulders with the person next to you. And you had no physical space to focus and not be distracted, let alone headspace to be able to do what you needed to do. So I would oftentimes go to the phone rooms, which was unusual that day and age, but I was lucky enough to have some of those. And so I would go to phone rooms, and because I needed to call clients and double check on something, or be able to just sit and focus when writing a report, whatever it was, I could do that more easily in a phone room. And luckily, those weren't always taken. But it just depended on the time of day. And because so much of our work was 60 to 80 hour work weeks, I would be there sometimes late at night when it was more difficult to work from home. And then years later, when we were able to work from home, it was just such a breath of fresh air. I had that flexibility. I could curate my space however I wanted and be able to get things done so much more quickly. So I think it was that extreme going from, gosh, this is not what I need at all. There aren't enough spaces, or it's not the space I need, to being able to do whatever I want. Yeah, I got spoiled a long time ago and started working from home pre-COVID. And so now it's just, to me, I think there are a lot of great things that we can apply from the home experience to the workplace to be able to encourage people to come in and give them what they need and do it naturally. So it's not just about the bells and whistles of perks. It's about drawing people into not only the environment they're working in and being able to work with good people, but also all being aligned in the meaning and the purpose behind the work that they're doing too, which is its own mean of connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you've just kind of described there to me is that it really requires an understanding of the organization, the people within it, how they work, what they need to do their job properly, and, and providing those spaces that then support and enable that. And it sounds like when you were talking about, there's heaps of corrals, but it had to go to the phone booth, those ratios for spaces weren't right. They didn't have the right types of spaces to support the type of work that particular organization is doing. And this is what I've seen again and again and again with the organizations that I come in and work with, is that there's this very much so this cookie cutter approach of, we're just going to put all these spaces in here because this is what we think, this is how workplaces are designed now, without really truly understanding the types of spaces that people need to support the type of work that they actually need to do. So if I understand what you're saying there correctly, it's not necessarily the fact that I need to own my own desk, but it's being able to find a space that is going to make me feel comfortable and enable me to do the work that I need to do when I actually come into the workplace. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So I think to some degree that would certainly satisfy most people. It was really that group of the population who might need a desk because of the work that they do, or because they actually feel like they need a space that they can create and curb the light so they don't have glare, so that they can control their sound levels if they're oversensitive. And I found over the years that I'm sensory sensitive. So this has given me a newfound awareness when doing a lot of the neurodiverse design that I've been doing and advising on. And I think it's such an important thing to make sure that designers are also aware of and take into account, because if you define neurodiversity, everyone is neurodiverse in their own way, because we're snowflakes, as they say. Everybody has slightly different inclinations. But, it's important just to be very empathetic in those designs and understand that other people's needs might not be the same as your own, and account for that in a way that perhaps allows for some dedicated spaces for a piece of the population, if that makes sense for your business. And then also just working out the other layout of the floor so that you can encourage those serendipitous encounters and connection, but not do that in a way that's going to then impact the people who are more sensitive and might be on the receiving end of that noise or, vibration when people are interacting in that other area of the floor space.
Yeah. And I'm just curious to know, and I'm probably going to draw on your change management experience a little bit more here, but if there are those individuals, let's say the organisation has taken the approach to have a shared desking philosophy, and there are some of those individuals who are probably more inclined to needing or wanting their own dedicated space, how do you kind of deal with that from then an equity perspective? Because if I'm over here and I don't have the opportunity to have a dedicated space, but my mate colleague over here, Joe, does, how do we kind of deal with that from a fairness perspective across the employee population?
I think with health equity, there's so much that you can have discussions about if you're transparent about those discussions, and if it also ties in well to your organization mission, vision, values. And a lot of companies do that really well. And it's just a matter of having the conversations instead of avoiding them. Because if you're avoiding them, people oftentimes think that you have something to hide. And if you're having the conversations, you're not only sharing what you're thinking about, which is oftentimes you're doing the best thing that you can for the company. But if you're sharing it, you can also involve them in the process. And if they're involved in the process, then everybody feels like they have a stake and they can help contribute to what's happening. And then you feel a little bit less bothered that, whoever over there has their desk. It's like, well, they're accounting. They need to have everything in their office and they need it to be locked up at night because those are our financials and we need to make sure that that information is protected. Or, you just get to know each other a little bit better. I'm also very hesitant about sharing too much. Like, I'm not one in the past who would share much about health situations. I think that that's people's individual prerogatives and business to share if they wish. I think there's a way that we could also have those conversations with HR so they could have quiet conversations in a way that they feel protected and, they have that sense of privacy. But I think that, again, if it's in the mission, vision, values of a company, then all the other workers will understand, or at least hopefully be a little bit more likely to, that if somebody has asked for an office, it's not because they just want to get away from everybody, just because, they want to look more important. It's because they really need that. And I think by the same token, the HR people need to also hear everybody else's needs and desires, but within reason, be able to work out those different things so that it is an equitable approach to the design.
So it really comes down to having a lot more conversations, really engaging people in the process. It's really that change management that needs to be happening, throughout the entire phase of all of these touch points, from, the original inception to the design phases to the actual execution and, onboarding into that new space. All of these little touch points need to be having those conversations so that we're getting, to the crux of what everyone needs and really understanding what it requires us to create a really great workplace so everyone feels like they belong, everyone feels like they're connected, everyone feels like they have what they need to be able to do their best work. It just sounds like it makes common sense. We just need to be having more conversations.
Right. And, you don't want to be talking yourself since you're blue in the face and, having all these conversations not going anywhere. Sometimes I call it the consulting figure eight of crazy, where you go into one direction and then out of curiosity, you explore the other just to come back to where you started. I think that there's value in documenting when something is working right, understanding that you can iterate and make change as you go, but then also having that line in the sand and document as to this is what we're agreeing on as our values for the institution, and this is how we're going to apply those going forward. But then make sure that you revisit them from time to time also, and do what makes sense as the company evolves and changes, as the work itself evolves and changes. But hopefully it's a conversation that can happen. And I think if it's guided by the intention behind the conversation, I think that will be had more readily and received with more respect, and, actually get somewhere instead of just being conversations going in circles.
I think that's great advice. And I think, even that level of transparency from an organisational perspective and going, look, we've been looking at the utilisation rates. We understand how many people are actually coming in. We know that you really guys, you enjoy working from home. We want to be able to create all these great spaces for us. And these are the trade-offs that we're looking at. And this is how we think we can manage that. And then, look at those things and going, look, you were coming from a workplace where all you've got is a meeting room and a workstation, and a couple of us have got offices. You don't have any of this other variety of space. But if we trade off owning our own desks, you can have these spaces, and then you can far more control your own personal adventure. And I do like the choose your own adventure take a little bit. For most people, I think that is an opportunity to then curate your day and to choose the best places for you to be able to work and have more variety in the type of environment that we have, because, open plan offices have been slammed for so long, and rightly so. But when they are designed well and you've got the right spaces to support the different types of activities, I think it does enable people to have a lot more choice and ownership about how they manage their workday.
Exactly. And I know you've had Libby Sander on before, and she's talked quite a bit about open plans, done some great research and understanding why open plans aren't always the best answer, even though architects and designers love it because it looks fancy for the space. But, you do need those levels and areas where you can establish focus. And that's why I think the solution isn't as simplistic as just being design based. That's why over time I've gone back to my change management roots and had this organizational approach for the people, and then the architectural for the actual building, plus the digital as we get into more of a smart buildings approach, because there are definitely roles for each in a nice solution that's multidisciplinary. But you need to make sure that you're having those conversations and understanding all those different factors that come into play.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That multidisciplinary approach is really important to understand the people, the place, and technology, because those three things coming together is what's making a workplace highly effective. And you leave any of them out and it all falls apart. So, look, I think that you and I are actually on the same page with this, which is really a great outcome for us all, because I think it really comes back to having a really detailed conversation, understanding what is going on inside an organization, diving into those workshops, doing the co-creation, understanding how people are working and, what are the unique needs of the business? What are the different departments doing? How are those different people working? And then, do we need to accommodate a few individuals that would benefit from being more singular in terms of their desk allocation, and just having those conversations, I think is imperative to ensuring that we are all doing our best work at work.
Exactly. And I think keeping in mind that inclusive design approach that I learned a lot about the past few years and have grown to appreciate, that really is this good design for good business, being able to emphasize that and designing with those individuals that are considered to be on the margins or have different needs by designing appropriately with them than you design for everybody. So I think just keeping that in the back of minds too is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I have absolutely loved our conversation today, Jenna. Thank you so much for joining me. And look, thank you for engaging in my little healthy debate here, because I think we've all learned a little bit here and kind of delved in and uncovered this in a little bit more detail. If any of our listeners want to get in touch with you, Jenna, what's the best way to do that?
I would say LinkedIn. Right now I'm updating my UTA Group website. So LinkedIn is always easiest. Just find me at Jenna Mikas there.
Fantastic. And we'll pop those links into the show notes as well. So look, thank you so much for joining us today, Jenna. It's been great having you on the show and sharing all of your insights into how we can create a workplace that is going to support us to flourish as individuals. And that no doubt has good impacts on all of our businesses. So thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, Mel.